historical fiction is just a wonderful reminder that what is essentially human
Yeah,
doesn't really change. So what we value, love, family, achievement, our personal flaws, whether, as you say, it's hubris or selfishness or a willingness to judge others harshly, if you think about that, those aren't that different than they were in the 16th century when one of my books was set, in the 13th century when one of my books was set, or in the ancient world.
hello everyone. My name is Ryan Burns. Today I'm excited to be interviewing the novelist Sophie Perinot to discuss the reissuing of her book, A Day of Fire. I'm the author of the novel Royal Beauty Bright and the upcoming novel My Dear Antonio. And I've been on a mission to interview all kinds of authors and see if I can learn a thing or two from them. So I met Sophie on social media through a mutual connection with my publisher. We've spoken a few times about career advice, and she's given me a lot of very honest, very frank advice, and that's been very helpful for my career. And yeah, so thanks for coming, Sophie. Yeah.
It's my pleasure, Ryan. I mean, who turns down a chance to talk about books and history?
Yeah,
Nobody.
it's fun. Yeah. So I'll introduce you. So Sophie Perinot has been a historical fiction novelist since 2012, when she published her first book, Sister Queens, at Berkeley at Penguin Random House. She followed this up in 2014 with A Day of Fire, which was published at William Morrow with HarperCollins. And this is an anthology novel that she co-authored with 5 other best-selling novelists, who include Kate Quinn, Stephanie Dray, Ben Kane, Eliza Knight, and Victoria Alvear. Hope I pronounced those right. Yeah. So these are some super accomplished novelists. Amongst themselves, they've written dozens of New York Times bestsellers, Wall Street Journal bestsellers, USA Today, Sunday Times, so they're a very accomplished group of writers, and their book tells the tragic story of the ancient Roman city of Pompeii, which, as we know, was destroyed by the volcano Mount Vesuvius that erupted. And so that's the book we'll be talking about today. Sophie is also a very active member of the Historical Novel Society, and her other books include Medici's Daughter in 2019 and Ribbons of Scarlet in 2019, which was also an anthology book. So on August 8th this year, though, A Day of Fire was reissued with a new cover. So I decided to give it a read. I really loved it, and I can't wait to talk about it with Sophie today. So yeah. Thanks again, Sophie. I'm super excited to talk to you. Would you mind giving us a summary of A Day of Fire and kind of tell us the story of how it came to be, how you got involved with it?
Well, as you noted, it's a novel of the last days, minutes, and hours of Pompeii.
Yeah.
And at the time of its destruction, Pompeii was a very lively resort, flourishing in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, which they did not know was a volcano. And it was pretty much the height of the Roman Empire. And the story is told through the lives and the eyes of a cast of characters that we intentionally plan to span the socioeconomic spectrum. So you have patricians and slaves, you have warriors, politicians, and the characters' paths cross and they recross as the tension is building until at last the reader knows who has died and who has survived. How it came to be is actually fascinating. So when A Day of Fire originally released, it was the first, I'm going to do a little quote thing, continuity novel in the historical fiction genre. And I'm going to clarify that term because you, of course, which is quite natural, referred to it as an anthology, but it's actually not.
Yeah.
Historical anthologies have existed for years, and that includes anthologies that were purposely created around common historical events or time periods or themes. And an example of that book, of that type of book, an anthology that came out actually the same year as A Day of Fire, would be Grand Central, which actually involved 10 historical authors, and they were writing separate stories set in the iconic Grand Central Station on a single day after World War II, but the stories didn't interlock. So in contrast to an anthology, continuity consists of a collection of interlocking fictional pieces to form a larger narrative structure. So in Day of Fire, 6 of us telling this story We all contribute to a larger plot arc, and they basically form a single novel with the characters story hopping. And what's interesting is the collaborative novel actually comes from the romance genre. It was introduced there. It did pretty well there. And once upon a time, four of us, Kate Quinn, Stephanie Dre, Eliza Knight, and I, thought to ourselves, what if we brought this into historical fiction, which nobody was talking about doing? And first we started with a spreadsheet of possible historical moments. I think the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand was on there, just different moments. And then we settled on Pompeii. Once we'd settled on Pompeii, we recruited the remaining two authors, and then we just kind of took this leap of faith. And if any of your listeners or watchers are interested in a larger scale discussion of the whole anthologies in historical fiction versus continuity thing, I actually wrote an article for the Historical Novel Society of North America magazine that's still available online, called E Pluribus Unum, Historical Novelists and a New Tool, High Concept Multi-Author Projects. So for those who want a better explanation or more detailed explanation, that's available.
Interesting. Yeah. That's definitely an interesting interesting format for a book, because we're so used to having the single author who writes it, virtuoso, and yeah, I think that could also help with marketing too, because you have all the different names on it. They all have their own audiences. So yeah, that's true.
It's a great way to cross-pollinate your readers. And that was one of our hopes in doing this, is that you'll read reviews of it, especially from the original release, where people will say, I only knew Ben Kane, or I only knew this person, and now I'm going to look for the books of these other authors. And that's like Christmas and your birthday rolled into one when you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and so earlier you mentioned when you sat down with these authors to try and decide what historical events you wanted to talk about. And I think it's interesting that you looked at, like you said, the shooting of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and Pompeii. And there are all of these different moments from history that people tend to remember, like for long periods of time. Like other examples that come to mind are like the Titanic, or like the Hindenburg, or stories like that. And for some reason, 2,000 years later, people still talk about Pompeii and Vesuvius. And I think people have like a macabre fascination with these kinds of stories. And I think it gets into a wider meaning, because I think these stories, they're kind of about like the hubris of mankind. Like the Titanic was the unsinkable ship, and Pompeii was like a resort town that kind of represents like the height of the Roman Empire. They're the most powerful. They'll be around forever. They'll never disappear. And then all it takes is the one volcano to kind of just like wreck it all. So yeah, and so I think these stories speak to us because it's also kind of like a story about like our mortality as people. I guess it speaks to all of us because in a sense, all of us are kind of living at the foot of the volcano, metaphorically. And so we have to, decide how to spend our time. And so like, as you're reading the book, there's this tension that goes throughout it because you know how the story ends already. Like, that none of the characters are going to make it out. And so I feel like that makes it all the more meaningful as you're reading it, Yeah.
Well, I actually think historical fiction is just a wonderful reminder that what is essentially human doesn't really change. So what we value, love, family, achievement, our personal flaws, whether, as you say, it's hubris or selfishness or a willingness to judge others harshly. If you think about that, those aren't that different than they were in the 16th century when one of my books is set, in the 13th century when one of my books was set, or in the ancient world. And I think one of the things people say, well, why write historical? Why not write contemporary? I actually think historical novels give us a chance to look at these kind of really difficult issues in our life from, I like to call it, a safe distance. So sometimes things are hard to look at in real time, but when you look at them through the lens of the past, you can look at them more critically. And that was really something when we did our second collaborative novel, and actually a number of people on this novel were on Ribbons of Scarlet as well. Kate Quinn, Stephanie Dre, myself, Eliza, those four carried through. And what was interesting about that is there were so many parallels. Women lead the March on Versailles, and women are largely written out of the history of the French Revolution. And we actually wrote that book. We're writing that book, and it was right around the time of the Women's March in Washington in 2017. And the parallels so evident. And so I think that's a gift that's in historical fiction that I'm not sure everybody thinks about. They know they enjoy it, but I don't think they're thinking of that aspect.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, you brought up an interesting point about how it's easier to look at things when they're in the distant past, because like a lot of genres of historical fiction are kind of like, if you could actually go back in time and tell that story, it probably would have been very taboo, and then like you fast forward like 100 years or something and everyone thinks it's so cool. An example that comes to my mind is like mafia stories. Like there's so many like mafia movies and mafia TV shows, like The Godfather and The Sopranos and everything. But like if you could actually go back in time to the 1920s, like the Italian Americans who had to like flee from Sicily, like my family who came here, they probably would not have reacted as kindly to like the Godfather movie,
No, because they're living it. I mean,
Yeah.
Cleveland had quite a lot of mob, and
Yeah.
the mob was very ethnic. And what I remember particularly, and we actually knew tangentially people in our family who were connected. But what was more interesting is when the Chinese mafia came to Cleveland, and they had a whole different set of rules, and a lot of those, they did not follow a lot of the rules that the traditional mobs, because we had Italian, we also had Jewish, that they followed. And it actually, I mean, I would have been fairly young when this happened, and I remember, people were like, "Oh, they don't have these rules." So you're right, living in that time, I don't think you would have viewed it as cinematographic, but maybe
Yeah.
a little bit existential.
Yeah. Yeah. And so another question I had for you was about, we mentioned it earlier, it's the format of this book. So it's a collaboration of 6 different novelists. And so each chapter is taken by a different novelist that tells the story of Pompeii from a different point of view, spanning all the different social classes. And I feel like this would be really tricky to do because it requires a lot of collaboration. When an author is writing a book on their own, they can have it all in their head, and they can keep track of all the different themes and like the foreshadowing and like the development of the story and everything. But I feel like it's difficult when you have 6 different authors and you have to keep them all on the same page. Like for example, the first chapter by Victoria, she's writing that, and she has to set up the setting. She has to like establish the tone and give some foreshadowing of the volcano. And so, like the order that the chapter appears in the book, like changes what the writer has to do. So how did you keep track of all that with your author friends?
Well, fortunately, we started with some heavy duty planning. At the time that we decided we were going to do this crazy thing, Stephanie and Kate and Eliza and I all lived Metro DC. So we literally went to Kate Quinn's house with our laptops, went to her dining room table, and we spent a day precisely plotting the time frame and where the breaks would be between sections, and exactly what historical events you were allowed to put in, what you were required to put in, and where you had to stop. So for example, I could depict the quakes proceeding including the big one right before the eruption, but I had to cut up right there. I couldn't show anything else but that. And there were certain things I had to, certain subplots and certain other characters I had to include in my section. And I'll talk about how I included other characters in a minute, because that's really fascinating. So we spent this huge afternoon, and very fortunately, Kate's husband, who is in the United States Navy, is a gourmet cook. So he fed us
Oh,
the
nice.
whole day at this table. So now we have this timeline. It's divided into segments. Now we have to decide who's going to write which segment. And that actually had a lot to do with people's brands and who was participating and what fits with their existing narrative voice. So, for example, I write The Heiress. This really fits me because I tend to write female-focused, female-forward historical brand. Whereas
Yeah.
Ben Kane, who was our British author, he writes, he had already written, he had quite a track record at that point of writing about Roman legionnaires. So he wrote The Soldier. And obviously we could have flipped that. If we'd flipped that, we would have had a very different book, but we also would have really been creating complications that we didn't need. So we thought, we are going to let people say who they'd like to write, but also look at how what they'd like to write fits into their brand. And that's kind of how we did it.
Okay.
And I don't know if you want me to talk now about how we did it, or we could wait and do that when we get to that part if you want.
Oh, yeah. Well, do you want to give the audience a quick summary of what your chapter is about, The Heiress?
Oh, yes, I'm happy to do that. My chapter is about a young woman who is wrestling with something we all wrestle with. What is the difference between love and infatuation? What is the difference between a good partner and someone who's just really hot to look at? And she's on the eve of marrying a family friend of her father's who's older than her, but not so much older that it would be odd in Roman times. And she's a very strong personality. And she's infatuated with an artist who's working on restoring and expanding some frescoes in her home. And she has to grow up very fast because she's growing up at top speed as her family is evacuating in advance of the eruption of Vesuvius. And so that's the story I tell. And the second main character in my book, who's the one who travels across stories more, is Gnaeus Helvinius Sabinus. And he is someone who is in chapters before my book and who goes all the way to the end of the story. And I love Sabinus. I just love him. So and it's interesting because a lot of people were like, oh, I just love him so much. And I said, I think it's because I just came to know him so well and cared about him so much. I wrote him in a way that he became a lot of people's favorite character.
Oh, nice. He was the engineer, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I liked his character. He was good. I thought
He's my
that
kind
yeah. I guess I mentioned this earlier, but your chapter reminded me a lot of the movie The Titanic. Just like the way it's kind of structured, because like there's like tension that goes throughout it because you already know that none of them make it out at the end, or most of them don't make it out at the end, I mean. And but still there's kind of like this love triangle, and like the characters are kind of pursuing like what's meaningful to them, and you know that it's not going to last, and so that kind of contrast of like the sweetness of like the romance, but then like the bitterness of like the volcano that's going to erupt soon. It kind of creates this interesting effect. But yeah, I thought that was
well, what are they? I mean, none of us really know if we're getting tomorrow. And one
yeah.
of the things saying earlier, which really spoke to me, is we were talking about how, the death is coming for everybody. And obviously it's coming for all of us eventually.
Yeah.
And it's the great equalizer. And we can't control it. The only thing we can control is, this is how my mother always phrased it when I was a child. She said, you can get up every day and try to be your best self.
Yeah.
And more than that, you cannot do. And so watching people do that in their lives, and some people don't even try. I mean, that's why there are villains in life, just like there are villains in books. I think that's kind of a universal language.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how it equalized all the different social classes. Like there's the rich family that had their big villa with all the different treasures and stuff in it. And when the volcano was erupting and they had to flee the town, they were all upset because they wanted to like take all of their treasures with them. But then like they realized that like none of it matters. Like like it won't save them. Like they just they just have to like focus on like their family, their loved ones. So yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah, yeah. Um, let's see. So another question I had. So when you were at Kate Quinn's house with all these different authors for the day, and her husband was cooking, I'm sure he's a character in the book. Um,
Not
uh,
my story. I'm sure he is. And
yeah.
he's a character in real life too, in the best possible way.
Uh, so how did you all get on the same page in terms of historical accuracy?
Well, that actually, I think it's really interesting because I give a lecture usually biannually at one of the schools in the state system in Pennsylvania about where different people who use history in non-academic contexts talk. And I always like to say historical novelists as opposed to say films. We really get the history right. So I think anybody who is a good historical novelist knows how to research, even if they haven't written about this period in the past. So I know that I approached it. I mean, there were novelists in the project who had already written in the ancient world. Ben Kane, at that point, I think, had already produced his Forgotten Legion series and also his Spartacus series. And Kate Quinn, which people think of her so much in the World War II era, but she actually had produced her Empress of Rome series, which
Oh
I
yeah,
had been
that's right.
a partner on. So she'd done that. Others of us, though myself included, had not really done that era. So I approached, and I think most people approach Day of Fire the way I approach any project, which is I start with general period research, then I move to specific research, like the famous frescoes in the Villa of Mysteries, or what are the traditions surrounding a Roman marriage, because I'm a character facing a Roman marriage. But one of the huge advantages to collaborative writing, which you don't really realize until you do it, is you have 6 authors to carry the load. Not everybody has to research everything. And I have an example from Ribbons of Scarlet rather than this. Eliza Knight was solely responsible for researching how long a human head remains sensate after it's severed from the body. So instead of 6 of us having to do that, one of us did that and explained it to everyone else. So in A Day of Fire, similarly, before you would, if you had a question about something, before you really delve, or if you really had already dove deep into something, we had a Google message thread that was just full of stuff. And we'd say, hey, today I researched this. So if anybody needs to know about this, I'm your person. I have got it. I mean, I have more facts than are ever going into this book. And so one of the reasons I entitled my article when I wrote it for Historical Novel Society magazine, E Pluribus Unum, as a start, is out of one, many is really the theme of collaborative writing. Out of many, one rather. So sharing the research burden was huge. It made things go much faster.
Okay, interesting. So I had another question. So this book was originally published in 2014. This year it was reissued. I know there's like the whole ancient Rome meme that was like trending on social media. I was wondering if that kind of influenced their decision to reissue it, or do you know why?
Well, it's kind of interesting because
Yeah.
actually I think people think that it was with them to begin with, but it wasn't. So what's interesting is in 2014, when we did this book made most of us hybrid authors. We had all been with major publishing houses, but when we first put this out, we put it out ourselves. Because if you're going to do something new in a genre that nobody's ever done before, sometimes the best way to do that is to bet on yourself. And so we put it out, but here's the thing, that meant and the book did very well. I mean, it had just, tons of reviews on Amazon, everywhere. It sold very well. It consistently returned royalties to all 6 of us for all the time that it's been out there.
What?
But it's exhausting to manage that business end of it. And I want to give a nod here to Eliza Knight, who was a saint. She managed the royalties and distributing to everyone else and getting us our tax forms for almost a decade. So at that point, when William Morrow, and a number of us had worked with William Morrow, Ribbons was with William Morrow, Kate Quinn does a lot with William Morrow, when they said to us, hey, we'd like to acquire the rights to this book and we'd like to put it out, we'd like to re-release it, we jumped at that because it took the business end of it out of our hands, which we were tired of doing. And also we got this beautiful new cover. And I do think the fact that they also added an audiobook to the menu. which was great because it wasn't out in audiobook before. It was out just in ebook and
Oh, that's
paperback.
good. Yeah, audiobooks are exploding right now. So yeah.
It gave us another way to connect with new readers. So it was a very exciting. We did not have any trouble agreeing among the six of us. This is what we wanted to do.
Okay, nice. Well, that's good to know. So would you be interested, if you have a copy of the book with you, would you be interested in reading a passage from it, from your chapter, if you're
I
interested?
would not mind doing that at all, but before I do that, I do
Yeah.
want to tell you about the most exciting thing about
Sure.
writing this book. Because
Sure.
I don't
Yeah.
forget to tell you, and that was, as I said, Sabinus was in my characters, other characters were in different stories.
Yeah.
What I think a lot of people don't realize is that means we wrote those scenes live. So I don't care if Ben was in Britain. I don't care if Stephanie was wherever she was. We opened a Google document. There's the first scene that I wrote with in live with anyone was with Stephanie, and her character, the whore, the prostitute, is having drinks with Sabinus, who is frequented her, and we are having a conversation. And all right, I know characters don't behave for authors, so sometimes you think you know what your character's going to say and they don't, but that's different because you do kind of know. Writing in real time in a Google Doc is like me having this conversation with you. You say something and all of a sudden the words are being typed. You've just typed what your character has said and words are appearing and you have no idea what those words are going to be because someone else is writing them. And I think it made the dialogue really genuine and really fresh, but it was just a game changer. I think everybody who came out of this would say their writing and their way of looking at a lot of things changed. And a lot of that was because of the real-time writing and critiquing each other's pieces after we finished. Everyone kept authorship of their own piece, but we exchanged. Each person exchanged with two people. We could decide what edits to take and what to reject. And then we all read the whole draft for continuity. And the first time I read it, it was so exhilarating. I thought, oh my God, we have something here. We have something really special.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I just for the high of writing real time with people again, I would sign on. I mean, I have done another one, but I would sign on for yet another one because it's the best. So, and I am happy to read a short bit from my part. I'm actually going to read the beginning of it.
Okay, cool.
All right, here we go. And apologies ahead of time if I make a mistake. I am an extremely dyslexic person, so this could be it's the reason my husband read all bedtime stories to my children when they were little, but it is what it is. 3 days until my life is over. Reaching out, I snap a branch off the nearest myrtle. It is still damp with morning dew. A few fading star-shaped blooms cling to it. Casting it down, I grind it beneath my sandal. Glancing about to make certain I'm unobserved, I take the doll from the pouch at my girdle. She's not the finest of my childhood playthings, not one of my carefully carved jointed dolls, but she is my favorite. Made by mother from scraps of linen and clothed in a dress of blue silk left from one of my own. I give her a little kiss and push her beneath a bush, another treasure spared from the flames. I am a creature of fire, born in the back of a wagon as my parents fled Rome during the great conflagration in the reign of Emperor Nero. I've been told that harrowing story 1,000 times. Told, too, that my extraordinary delivery is the reason my hair is red as flame. Well, fire may have birthed me and marked me, but it won't have the mementos of my girlhood. I do not care that it is a Roman tradition for a girl to burn such things on the morning of her wedding. I will make no offering to Venus because, were it up to me, I would not be a bride, at least not the bride of Gnaeus Helvius Sabinus. And that kind of gives you a sense of Amelia. She is a very strong person.
Well, that was great. Yeah, thanks for reading it. I hope that that catches the interest of anyone listening who might be interested in learning about ancient Rome. So, yeah.